The moment the first laugh echoed through the concert hall, something in the air changed. It was subtle, cruel, the kind of polished mockery that did not need words. Just a smirk, just a glance. Just a famous pianist stepping back from the microphone, with that unmistakable tone in his voice that told everyone, we are about to be entertained, at someone else's expense. Sitting near the back, in a modest navy dress, her hands folded in her lap, Elise felt every eye turn toward her. Moments ago, she had been invisible, just another member of the event staff, quietly handing out programs, guiding latecomers to their seats. She never expected to be pulled into the spotlight. Certainly not like this. "Come now," said Maestro Adrian Valliere, his voice ringing through the hushed room. "You look like someone who appreciates." "Good music, do you play?" Elise hesitated, her heart pounded. A few scattered chuckles floated through the crowd, not kind ones. Adrian Valliere, the world-renowned virtuoso, whose career spanned 4 continents, who played for royalty and presidents, stood beside a gleaming concert grand and looked directly at her. His white tuxedo was crisp, his expression bemused. I used to," Elise replied softly. A ripple of amusement moved through the audience like a wave brushing polished marble. Valliere gestured to the piano. "Well then, do give us a little something. We always welcome a surprise." It was not a request. It was a performance, his, not hers. A calculated moment meant to reinforce a hierarchy that Elise knew all too well. He had no idea who she was, what she had lived through, or the kind of grief and fire buried in her fingertips. But she stood. Anyway, her flats made no sound on the velvet aisle as she approached the piano, the hush around her tightening, like a noose. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her throat was dry, but her mind was suddenly clear. She did not sit right away. She ran her hand across the polished surface, as she had every morning before rehearsals. Back when her life was music, and before it was something she had to leave behind. Then, with a breath so quiet it barely moved the air, she sat. No announcements, no defense. Just 10 fingers resting on the keys, and then she played. Not scales, not a simple piece, but Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. The room that had giggled moments before fell into stunned silence as the first stormy chords hit the air like thunder. Elise's hands moved with a power and precision born not of practice alone, but of lived experience. Pain, hope, loss, and memory. And just like that, Adrian Valliere, the maestro who had summoned her for sport, stood, rooted to the floor, watching, as everything he thought he knew unraveled at the hands of a woman he had dared to underestimate. No one in the concert hall moved. The air felt thick, charged, as if even the chandeliers had paused to listen. Elise's hands flew across the keys, summoning fire and rain, memory and defiance. All within a piece most pianists feared to touch in public. But she was not performing for applause. She was not playing to prove anything. She was remembering. Every note called back hours spent in cramped practice rooms with broken heaters and flickering lights. Every measure was a conversation with her late father, who used to hum along with her while stirring soup in their tiny apartment. He was the one who taught her to feel the music first, to let the keys speak from her soul, not just from her training. He had believed in her long before anyone else did, and he was the one she lost during her final year at the conservatory, just before she vanished from the scene. Altogether, the world forgot her. She had to survive. Music took a back seat to paying rent, taking odd jobs, and patching together a life where concerts were no longer possible. But music, real music, never left her. It lived in her quietly, like an ember waiting for wind, and tonight, Adrian Valliere had unknowingly blown on that ember. In the front row, a young girl's mouth hung open as she clutched her mother's hand. A critic who had been taking smug notes put down his pen. Even the donors in their diamond earrings and stiff tuxedos leaned forward, not out of politeness, but from genuine awe. And Adrian, he was frozen. For the first time in decades, he felt something he could not immediately name. Was it jealousy? Shame? Wonder? He had invited Elise to the piano to mock her. Spontaneous moment to entertain the elite and reinforce the unspoken. Boundary between artist and audience. Master and unknown. But now, he was watching her hands do what his could no longer do, play. Not with precision, but with hunger. She reached the Prelude's stormiest section with a flourish that sent chills down the spine of even the most seasoned musicians in the room. Her timing was flawless, her dynamics thunderous, yet controlled. But more than that, her expression never changed. Calm, focused, fierce, This was not a woman out of her depth. This was a pianist reborn, as the final chords roared and then softened. Into the haunting resolution, Elise sat still, letting the last vibrations echo through the space. Not a single person clapped, not because they were unimpressed, but because they had forgotten how to breathe. And for Adrienne Valliere, that silence said more than any standing ovation ever could. Elise rose slowly from the piano bench, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of everything she had just released. The concert hall remained utterly still, suspended in a kind of reverent disbelief. She did not look for applause. She did not even glance at Adrienne. She simply stepped aside, as if what had just happened was not extraordinary, but inevitable. And then, finally, someone stood. It was an elderly man near the center aisle, Professor Martel, the retired head of the Paris Conservatoire. He clapped. Once, then again, slow, deliberate, eyes glistening. Others followed hesitantly, then all at once. The room exploded into applause, not polite, not rehearsed, but raw. Cathartic. Dadadera still sat frozen. The same man who had spent decades being the first to receive such ovations. But not this time. The clapping was not. It was for the woman he had mocked. He stood eventually, out of sheer instinct, but did not join in. His thoughts were a blur. He had spent a lifetime mastering form, theory, legacy, but he had forgotten heart. Forgotten that the soul of music does not reside in ivory keys or gold-plated programs, but in truth, and tonight, truth had come wearing second-hand shoes and no makeup. Backstage, Elise found a quiet corner to sit down. Her heart still raced, but it was a different rhythm now, one of release, of rediscovery. She was not supposed to be here, not in this hall, not on that piano bench. She had spent too many years believing that door had closed forever, but life had just swung it wide open. Staff member approached her gently, eyes wide. That was breathtaking. "Who are you?" Elise gave a soft smile. One who never really stopped playing, just stopped being heard. Within minutes, she was ushered back toward the front, not by request, but demand. Guests surrounded her, asking questions, offering business cards, requesting interviews. Even the conductor, a stern woman known for her icy standards, took her hand and said, "You reminded us what this is all supposed to be about." Elise thanked them all, gracious but slightly distant. She had not done this for recognition. She had done it because something in her refused to stay quiet. And now, the world had listened. Adrienne Valliere remained seated even as the concert hall buzzed with renewed energy. The very air felt changed, charged with something real, not prestige. Not perfection, but presence. A rawness that had stripped away the polite facades of wealth and reputation. And he, the so-called maestro, was at the epicenter of his own undoing. He had watched Elise play like a man witnessing the divine. It was not just her skill, though her command of the instrument was undeniable. It was the soul in her performance. It's the authenticity he could not fake. No matter how many accolades he had gathered, she had made people feel. When was the last time his music had done that? For decades, Adrienne had stood atop the mountain of elite classical musicianship. He had played in Vienna, Berlin, New York. He had performed for royalty, heads of state, and billionaires. But somewhere along the way, he had traded emotion for perfection. And now that perfection felt hollow. The board of trustees approached him backstage, offering half-hearted praise, but their eyes kept drifting to the crowd still clustered around Elise. "That woman, what's her name?" one of them asked. "Elise." "Laurent," Adrienne replied softly, almost ashamed he had not remembered it earlier. She had auditioned for him once, years ago, scholarship program, fresh out of conservatory. He had dismissed her after just 2 minutes, told her she was too emotional, not refined enough. He had sent her away with a paper score and a cold smile, and she had disappeared until tonight. Adrienne stepped quietly through the crowd. Elise was still near the piano, surrounded by admirers. She looked overwhelmed but radiant, her shoulders straighter than when she had entered the room. He waited for the crowd to thin before approaching her. "Elise," he said. She turned, surprised to see him. "Mr. Valliere." There was no malice in her voice, just calm acknowledgement. That, more than anything, humbled him. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice low. "For tonight, for before. I was wrong." A pause stretched between them, delicate but unbroken. "I was not trying to prove anything," Elise replied gently. "You invited me. I just accepted." Adrienne looked down, his throat tightening. "You reminded me why I started playing, and why I stopped feeling it." She smiled faintly. Music waits, even when we forget it. Those words sank deeper than any review ever had. And in that moment, Adrien Valliere knew he had been both teacher and student tonight, but not in the way he expected. The echo of Elise's performance lingered long after the hall had. Guests had gone home shaken, stirred, changed. The velvet seats no longer held the usual stiffness of entitlement. They held memory now. Memory of a night when a forgotten woman stepped into the light and played truth into being. Elise sat alone. Near the edge of the stage, her hands folded on her lap. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of silence, not as emptiness, but as fullness. She had spoken, through music. Through every note she had ever practiced in solitude. Through every day she had dusted that same concert hall floor. Invisible.Adrie returned. A slow, uncertain step, carrying him toward her. But he no longer looked like the giant she once feared. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was a man searching for grace. I wanted to ask you something, he said, standing beside her. Not as a performer. As a man who's forgotten. How to begin again. She turned her head slightly. I want to step back from performing for a while, he said. Not retire. Reflect. And I want to create something different. Space for people like you, who never had the chance to be heard. Would you help me build that? Lee stared at him, startled by the sincerity in his tone. Help you find lost voices? No, Adrien replied. I want you to help them find themselves like you just did for me. It was a quiet offer. No grandeur, no press release. Just a beginning. I will think about it, Elise said softly. But if we do this, it must not be about redemption. It's not for you, not for me. It must be about the music. It's about the ones who are never invited to the stage. Adrien nodded, a new humility shaping every line of his face. At that moment, a small envelope was slipped into Elise's hand by the stage manager. She opened it and found a handwritten note from the conductor. You changed the room. Come back any time, not as staff, as artist. Elise blinked, her throat tightening. It was not a contract, not a promise of fame, just a door opening wide. Outside, the night was cold and quiet. But inside, a fire had been lit that neither Adrien nor Elise could put out. Not now, not ever. 6 months later, the posters outside. The grand concert hall no longer bore only the names of the usual titans of classical music. Among them, in elegant serif print, is a name that had once belonged only to the staff registry, Elise Laurent. Solo piano recital, the very same hall that once overlooked her, now opened its doors in her honor, a full house. Sold out weeks in, advanced not out of curiosity, but reverence. People remembered. They had come to relive that night, to feel again what she had made them feel. Backstage, Lise stood by the mirror, adjusting the cuffs of her midnight blue gown. It was modest, timeless, nothing flashy, nothing artificial. Just like her. Beside her stood Adrien Valliere, but not in the spotlight, not at the piano. Tonight, he was her page-turner, her silent supporter, the man who once mocked her now quietly, carrying her music forward. You ready? He asked. No, she replied, with a small smile, but I am here, and that is enough. Adrien chuckled softly. You always were the braver one. As the stage manager gave the nod, Elise stepped forward into the warm glow of the hall. The audience rose not out of routine, but respect. Mrs. Delacroix, who once laughed in the front row, now clutched a handkerchief. The mayor and several cultural patrons filled the VIP seats, her expressions expectant. Reverend Elise sat down at the same grand piano that had once served as her burden and battleground. She placed her fingers on the keys not with nerves, but with gratitude. The first piece was Chopin's Ballade. No one. The same piece she had played the night, everything changed. But this time, it was not a challenge. It was not a reclaiming. Of power, it was a homecoming. Each note unfolded like a memory and a blessing. A story told without words, and across the city, people spoke of her not as a miracle or a fluke, but as a master. Elise Laurent had not been discovered. She had been revealed. Because sometimes, the most powerful performances do not come from those born into privilege, but from those who fought to be heard and, in doing so, reminded everyone that greatness can wear the plainest clothes, speak in the softest voice, and still leave the loudest echo, and in that final note gentle, resolved, perfect. The audience understood. They had not just witnessed music, they had witnessed truth.